try and win games.
From a United perspective is, it's like, we don't need that. Do you know what I mean? We've literally pumped $1.5 billion into that family. Imagine that was put into the... We don't need that.
These two think that you're obviously worried about the fact of state ownership. That doesn't bother you.
No, I've gone through 3 stages in my sort of Glazer sort of era at Manchester United. The first one was, to be fair,
you were all right when they were paying you.
No, the first was when I was a player in my 20s, when I didn't understand, to be fair, a lot about finance.
Are you too happy with Qatari ownership of Manchester United?
Personally, I don't want any state to own Manchester United. I don't believe we should, any club, whether it's a Western state, Middle Eastern state, whatever, I don't think any state should own Manchester United.
So you'd rather the Glazers stay than the Qataris come in?
I'd still want the Glazers to leave.
But what would you prefer?
It's a hard question because on one hand, you've got people that are taking $1.5 billion out over a course of 15 years. And on the other hand, you'd have people that are putting it in. But I just never want to be linked to a state. You're then thrown into the mix with anything that state does, good or bad. But I'm realistic enough to know that my opinion meant very little when the Glazers took over, and my opinion means very little now. Ultimately, the club's going to be sold, if it's sold, to the highest bidder. And I'm eternally an optimist, so I'm kind of looking at this like, is this the Glazers kind of, you know, manipulating the negotiations and trying to crank more money up out of these people? Because it's clear the Qataris want United, it's clear Ineos want United, but they're creating a negotiating point.
If they don't sell now, it'll be carnage.
It will.
I can't imagine. We've seen the protests over the last 15 years, 18 years since they took over. What we saw last season before the Liverpool game. If they go this far and tease us into thinking we're going to sell, and all of a sudden, actually, we're staying, I don't think it is worth it for them at this point.
You just mentioned that you weren't happy with Qatari ownership. Is that a minority feel at Manchester United?
Ownership, I'm not happy
with. Or state ownership?
I don't care what nationality.
Okay, state ownership. But do you feel you're in a minority with Manchester United fans, or is that a groundswell of opinion?
I think you have 2 kind of divisions of fan base at the moment, and I think most clubs will. You have kind of like the online fan base where they're very vocal, and a lot of people don't care. They just want Mbappe and they want a new stadium and they want all these kind of things. And I kind of get it. Like, if you're asking football fans to be, you know, to comment on all these kind of political things, it's difficult. Most people just want to go and watch their football team on a Saturday or Sunday. I kind of get that. But I think a lot of fans within the ground would be a little bit apprehensive towards state ownership. And
but it would be nothing like when the Glazers came in here in the green and gold campaign.
I don't think you'd see the same sort of backlash.
I think the relief of them leaving will kind of probably be above and beyond anything else.
Yeah. Is that something you want to bring the Newcastle fans in? You're obviously in that situation now. But what the lads have just mentioned there was that relief that Mike Ashley had gone almost in some ways makes you forget about what your ownership is about, where it's from.
Absolutely, yeah, because for us it was the release of Mike Ashley, the release of, you know, no hope and no ambition was so great, other than whoever was coming in. And listen, I didn't choose Mike Ashley to be in charge, didn't choose Saudi Arabia to come in. In an ideal world, we would go back to the 90s when Shea Given was there and Freddie Shepherd, a local businessman, local fan, owned Newcastle and had the money injected. Now there's no way we can do that and compete at the top end of the Premier League without allowing the likes of a state come in, unfortunately. But at the end of the day, the things they're doing for our club and our city, you know, as a fan, like Adam says, that's all we look for.
The thing from a United perspective is, it's like, we don't need that. Do you know what I mean? We've literally pumped $1.5 billion into that family. Imagine that was put into the... We don't need that kind of sugar daddy to be pushing all the money into the club.
Well, I think that has more conversation around it as well. The Glazers' ownership has, as you've touched on there, it's changed what United fans expect or think is necessary for United to be successful. As Adam said, 1.5 billion through having the Glazers as owners. Like, that would be a new stadium, no problem.
Laurie, can we just go back to the bids? Because the 2 bids were made public were obviously Ineos and the Qatari bid. I can't believe that there aren't US consortiums have come in. And is it right that the banking broker that's dealing with it, Rain, have had to warn the 2 bidders that have made their bids public to stay silent because it's confidential. And there actually probably are other US consortiums or US bids that are behind it, or other bids from around the world. That there can't just be 2 bids for Manchester United.
I mean, that's what we're told. You know,
There's just 2 bids.
We've asked that question, and we think, you know, maybe people are keeping their cards very close to their chest. And as we touched on before the Leicester game, is there a benefit to staying silent for the time being? Because at the moment, all the focus is on, you know, Sheikh Jassim and Sir Jim Ratcliffe, and actually, you know, there's a value to being kind of, you know, doing your work quietly. But yeah, I think the price. You look at, I mean, the FT came out with a piece on Sunday which valued the club at $1.6 billion, which, okay, I think is on a pure business term. So it's like, you know, profit and loss. You know, clearly the club is worth more than that, but 6-7 billion. You know, there's only a small pool of people that can afford that.
And I think it's a fair point. I think fans and football has lost the fight, and the horse has bolted when it comes to who owns your football club now in the Premier League.
So obviously, these two think that you're obviously worried about the fact of state ownership. That doesn't bother you.
No, I've gone through 3 stages in my sort of Glazer sort of era at Manchester United. The first one was, to be fair,
you were all right when they were paying you.
No,
the first was when I was a player in my 20s, when I didn't understand, to be fair, a lot about finance and business. And to be fair, we were all under the very watchful eye of Sir Alex Ferguson, and you didn't complain about ownership, you didn't complain about anything other than playing football. Not one employee in the club, all 500 of us, we got on with our jobs, that's what you did. And I was in my 20s, it's not an excuse, it's just a fact of where I was in my life. Then I left Manchester United, I did an ambassadorial role with them for about 3 or 4 months. I didn't particularly like it that much, to be fair. And I started to understand a lot more about business. I saw that ultimately Sir Alex Ferguson had underpinned that, obviously as the football project started to fail, underpinned that sort of, if you like, ownership, and sort of kept them, if you like, afloat for the previous 8 to 10 years. The last 7 or 8 years, it was when the Super League, I mean, the dividends, the debt, the lack of investment in the ground. I remember looking from my hotel over at the ground one day and thinking, and I remember saying it, the stadium's rusty, and it actually was rusty. Literally the paint around the stadium was rusty, and I thought, that can't be right. You wouldn't do that to your own house. So I thought, they're not investing in the stadium. The stadium, to be fair, was travelling around the ground, seeing Tottenham, Arsenal, all these other brilliant stadiums that were emerging in Europe as well, the Allianz Arena, all these brilliant things that were happening in different countries. Lack of investment in the regeneration, the community, everything was, and I thought, they're failing at football, they're failing in the non-football side, and then the Super League came where they, to be fair, turned not only on their own stadium and their own fans, they actually turned on the whole of the rest of football as well and try and sell out. That was it, and I went then into my 3rd phase, which was, to be fair, when I started speaking up publicly. Previous in that 2nd phase, though, my stance was, when United fans would have a go at me, and a lot of United fans had a go at me in that period, I would say, who is the alternative buyer? It's going to be Russia, it's going to be China, it's going to be the Middle East. They're your buyers for this football club, or it's going to be another US family or fund similar to the Glazers, which is leveraged buyout and borrowing and private equity. Which one do you want? And no Manchester United, just like Adam's not been able to find the answer to that question, it's difficult.